we're recording. Let me pull Discord back up so I can see the chat. All right, so hello. Oops. Oh no. There we go. So my name's Aster. They, she. I am currently in training to be a Montessori guide. We say guide instead of teacher because it's a whole thing. And today I want to talk about solidarity with children, simply because they are an oppressed class that really doesn't get talked about a lot, especially in these more adult circles where we're more politically active. There's a lot of argument to be made that children are the most oppressed class. I know comparison of oppression isn't exactly useful, but they're left out of pretty much every conversation. And in order to rectify that, I think it is good to have a better understanding of children, who they are, what they're going through, and how we can help. So, my background, I used to be a child, like many of you, I assume. And, I have a lot of memories that inform my experience, and, remembering how adults treated me, and that sort of thing. I was also raised in Montessori culture. I went into Montessori school when I was 6, and I went through until I was about 13. And then I also have 6 years of college. Like I said, I'm in training to be a Montessori adolescent guide, and I'm also neurodivergent, and I think so there's some insight there from my experience as being a neurodivergent child who was late diagnosed. So that's a little about me. Right. So in a lot of what I'm going to be talking about does come directly from my training program. So while there are a lot of theories around child development, we'll be mainly focusing on the Montessori lens. So children as an oppressed class, a lot of this comes from that they're seen as incapable, largely, that they can't take care of themselves at all, that they need to have an adult make decisions for them. And, you might be thinking, like, infant, okay, maybe that makes some level of sense, but this view goes all the way through adolescence and to a degree even to, like, college. Right. And while it's true that younger folk do have a lot of things that they struggle with or need help with, they are, in fact, quite capable of doing things within their own skill set, and there's just not a good understanding of that skill set. The other component to this is, like, schools are one of the primary organs of social reproduction, so, like, that's where culture gets passed on. So you have things like schools, the home, the family unit, churches, right, these kind of social institutions, that's where the culture gets passed on. So children are seen as an opportunity to shape the future by shaping the children. Rather than let the future be shaped by the children themselves, right? Talking to a lot of people who had more experience with public school than I do, it is, sit down, shut up, do the work. Your personal interests aren't really taken into account. Personal needs aren't really taken into account. A lot of this is justified because we see children as, like, something fundamentally different, rather than seeing them as little adults who are just, like, learning the world. They are somehow separate in their humanity from the rest of us. And it's a level of dehumanization, right? You see this in other intersections of oppression, where in order to justify what you're doing, you dehumanize. So some of the ways public education does this: it heavily restricts autonomy, it inhibits natural development cycles in favor of, like, catering to adult schedules and adult needs. It's pretty expressly conditions individuals to join like the workforce, and prepares them either to be even private schools do this too, but it's a different class, right? You're being prepared to go into the managerial class versus the working class. But it's still that kind of like grooming for these class roles. And then its other primary function is to serve as childcare so that adults can work full-time jobs, right? Because the kids have to go somewhere. Schools also contribute to alienation by being transient communities. They inhibit the transient nature of like having different teachers every year, different peers every year. It inhibits like creating close-knit community and tight bonds between individuals. Like you might have a small group of friends, but you're not going to get that community solidarity that I think a lot of us are looking to build doing our mutual aid work and that sort of thing. And then just tying back into what I said earlier about like being desired to be shaped by the adult world, it's because you're seen as a resource, right? Workers, to the people in charge, workers are a resource. It's manpower to get stuff done. It's something to be controlled, manipulated, sold. And children are just like a step in that production line. So that is children as an oppressed class. So within Montessori pedagogy, we break down human development into 4 planes. There might be more, but the research that Dr. Montessori did focused primarily on the first 2 with a little bit on the third. And then no one's really talked about the 4th, because I think for a long time the consideration was that like after high school you're an adult, right? And so there's other ways of discussing these developmental patterns than specifically these 4 planes. Like I think Waldorf has like 3 planes, but they all kind of agree on like the general beats, just where you're drawing lines between things changes. So also important within the Montessori understanding of human development is the human tendencies, and we'll go over those in a bit more detail, I think, next slide. But these are things that all humans do, and they're kind of our basic toolkit for like what lets us exist in the world and interact in the world. And then so all humans have them, from infant to senior citizens. But they express differently depending on your circumstance, your age, and like where you are in developing these tools. So a big belief and understanding with the Montessori pedagogy, and I should note that this all came from like scientific observation. So Dr. Montessori was a psychiatrist in Italy in the early 1900s. She worked with a lot of disadvantaged youth, so people in poverty, orphans, special needs kids, and she was originally like running an orphanage and told just like have these kids do whatever, like just make sure they're okay. And so she sat and she observed them and would kind of modify the environment around them to see what would make them happier, keep them more engaged in learning, and found that by preparing a suitable environment that you could kind of like heal children in a lot of ways from a lot of like the struggles they would have encountered from their trauma and negligence that society had put them through. And so through these observations, she determined that like the purpose of the child and of the adolescent is to self-construct, right? These, like I said, you're born with all these faculties, but you have to develop them to kind of reach their full potential. And children instinctively want to do that. There is some inner drive that says, go gather information, practice your skills, adapt to your environment as best you can. And then when you become an adult, you have all that capability, and then you just kind of like perpetuate what you learned as a child. And so from this, she talks a lot about the strength of humans is our adaptability, our ability to adapt to any sort of environment, and in turn, use these skills, these tendencies to adapt the environment to suit our needs. So the human tendencies, again, there's like some debate on specifics. You could group some of these together. You could go into more granular detail. But these are like real basic things that every human does. So the first is to orient, which is to place ourselves in an environment and to like notice changes in it, right? So it's to know where we are. The missile knows where it is because it knows where it isn't, kind of thing. Like that's you just have to do that to be able to exist in an environment. And then building off that, once we know where we are, we want to explore where we are, to gather more information about it, to have a better understanding of that environment. And this is usually done through seeking out novelty. So it's like young children, babies, are fascinated by everything you put in front of them because it is new, it is novel, it is new stimuli, this is new information for them to be able to adapt to the environment, so they are very interested in that. And then to order, we like to put things in order. As someone with ADHD, I debate exactly what to order means with some of my peers. But it is we've gathered all this information from orienting and exploring. Now we need to make sense of it, and that is what to order is. And then the other thing is to have like strong internal order. We need to have external order, right? Like the physical world around us has to make sense for stuff in our head to make sense, and so you can see this play out in older people in like trauma survivors. Right, so you talk about like clutter, the difficulty staying organized is considered to be like a symptom of trauma. That's because you've experienced your tendency to create order for yourself has been inhibited, right? So if you were like in an abusive household as a child and you were never allowed to create order for yourself, it was always imposed on you by someone else in your life. It becomes very difficult to maintain order in your environment and like emotional order, so we would say like self-regulating. So to calculate, Dr. Montessori talks about the mathematical mind, and this doesn't necessarily just mean arithmetic. Our mathematical mind is it's the part of our brain responsible for logic. Right, for pattern seeking, or for seeing patterns, for manipulating patterns. It is what gives us like our predictive capabilities of you look at the weather report. Oh, it's probably going to rain. I should bring an umbrella because if I don't, I'm probably going to get wet. Right, like it is not. You're not responding immediately to the rain falling to get the umbrella. You are predicting that this will be something useful in the future, right? That's your mathematical mind. And in this way, all humans possess, a mathematical mind. It's not just the people who are good at calculus, right? Arithmetic, what we traditionally think of mathematics, is a very specific kind of logic. But our human capabilities are much broader. This is also like, being able to like build things with your hands, envision things in your head, do like spatial reasoning. And then this builds into our ability to abstract. So I touched on that a little bit. And abstracting is just being able to interact with information that isn't directly in front of us. Right, so like I said about the reading the weather report and then inferring that you might get wet, so you might want some protection against that. That is an abstraction. Humans also have a tendency to work. So we have all of this information. We can make predictions about this information and use those predictions to help ourselves. And we like to do stuff with this information. So that is our tendency to work, right? So I don't believe in lazy people. Right? If someone's lazy, it usually means that they're going through something's not right in their environment, they're overstressed, or they're doing something that they're just genuinely not interested in. Because humans like to interact with their environment, to change their environment, And then this is another kind of important Montessori term, is supranature, and this is our constructed or built environment. So this is one of the places where I disagree with Montessori, is that she argues that like humans are unique in constructing supranature. But like, well, we have beavers and bees and ants and lots of other creatures who modify the environment to both augment their own capabilities and to make the environment more suitable for themselves. Humans are just really, really good at it. So she argues that it's like humans' purpose to modify the world in this manner. I'm like, I think life just does that in general. I don't think that's something necessarily special about us, but we do seem to be a lot better at it than many other critters. And to accomplish all this, we have the tendency to be exact or to repeat. This is basically, we want specific outcomes, and this is also how we get better at things, right? So you're drawing a picture, you're not happy with how it came out, you draw it again and again and again until you're happy with how it came out, right? And this is also kind of like a fundamental part of learning for humans, is repeating tasks, because you are strengthening the connections in your brain to be better at the thing. And then that leads into this desire for perfecting oneself. So we talked about the inner drive children have to self-construct, to want to best adapt to their environment. And of course, this doesn't go away when you become an adult. You've just become like kind of settled in. You've gotten pretty close to achieving like homeostasis with your surroundings. But the perfection of oneself is just this continued desire to learn and to adapt, and to improve where you can. And then we are social creatures, so we also have a tendency to communicate with one another. An important part of the mathematical mind and the pattern building is it facilitates communication. It allows us to take all this information that we got from orienting and exploring it, to order it into to order it in ways that we can transfer it to other humans, right? So like grammar, learning your language, finding meaning in art and symbols, or even just finding meaning in like body language, right? So we use our mathematical mind to understand all of that, to communicate, and then communication is what allows us to associate, right? To form community, to form societies. I think like mutual aid is a really excellent example of this, because like the whole idea of mutual aid is a very direct association, right? It's not like charity, right, where you don't really have any obligation or connection to the people you're helping, right? Like this is mutual aid is very core to building a tight-knit community. And this plays into something else that Montessorians talk a lot about, which is that humans are interdependent, right? We need each other to survive and to prosper. You have the people who are like, oh, I'm going to go homestead and do it all by myself. And it's like, well, you can kind of sort of do it, but like you're still like, are you forging all your own nails to build your house? Are you cutting all of your own lumber? How about this food you need to subsist off of while you're getting your farm up and running, right? It is like humans need other humans, I think, and then mutual aid is just like this very like grounded expression of that. I think like in my opinion, mutual aid is kind of the expression of interdependence in one of its like purest forms. So those are human tendencies, and like I said, they will express differently at the different ages, but it's something adults do too. So the first plane, like I said, there's 4 planes of development. The first plane of development is generally from 0 to 6 years. Human development starts in the womb, right? Your brain starts developing as a fetus. You even start developing, you start developing motor skills. You're kicking, you're grasping. you are starting to cultivate language skills even in the womb, because you can hear the outside world. So like, people talking to the tummy for the babies, or playing music. That sort of thing is like, that is affecting the development of the child. And so like when a baby comes out, they will recognize voices of people who have been around the pregnancy, and they will be kind of attracted to those people, right? They'll feel safer with them. That's like who they'll reach for when they're first born. So during the first plane, we have this state of what we call the absorbent mind, because during these first 6 years, really, the brain is doing its most growth. There are billions and billions of connections being made. A lot of them will be trimmed down as you age, but this is where the foundation for the rest of your life is set. So important things that are happening now is, like I said, language acquisition skills. So it starts with just hearing language spoken around you, and then as you get a bit older, you can start picking up written language and understanding like syntax. You'll be able to speak yourself and learn to effectively communicate. But you need exposure to language during this period to do that well. We've seen a lot of cases where children have been denied exposure to language until they were in the second or third plane, and while you can learn, you will never be as fluent or as able to or be able to express yourself in the same way or develop like the same level of understanding than if you had language exposure during these first years. This is also where you're developing motor skills, right? Like I said, you start with the kicking and the grasping, and then you learn to hold your head up, and then you learn to crawl, and you learn to walk, and then you like learn on refining these skills to do like complex manipulation, and working with your hands and coordinating the work of your hands with the work of your mind. You are also picking up basic cultural norms, so like politeness. How do you interact with your physical environment? Children of this age mirror really heavily. Like, that's one of the ways they learn, is by mirroring. So if you have a cabinet door and you kick it shut, don't be surprised if your child goes around kicking cabinet doors, right? Because they are now learning that this is how we close a cabinet. So it's really important to model behavior at this age. And really the goal of the first plane for the child is to achieve functional independence. And functional independence is being able to do most of the tasks to take care of yourself. So can you go to the bathroom when you need to? Can you get food when you need to? Can you dress yourself? Can you groom yourself? Can you pick your own work? That sort of thing. And when we talk about children as an oppressed class, a lot of these capabilities are assumed, that children are assumed that they can't do these things, so they're never given the opportunity to practice these skills, so they lose it. So we prepare food for them. We pick what they're going to wear. We tell them what to work on, and this is especially true in public school, right? But, I saw a video of children in Congo who were first and early second plane, and like they went on a fishing trip by themselves. Like there was an 8-year-old kid who was kind of leading the band of like 6-year-olds. He had an infant on his back. They wandered off into the jungle. They found a river. They went fishing, and they cut and cooked the fish themselves, and they came home. And they were using machetes to do this, and then they came home, and they were happy and fed, and they even had a bath out in the river when they were doing that, right? So it's like children of this age are fully capable of taking care of themselves, provided we let them, and provided that there are tools in the environment to let them do that. If we want them to prepare their own food, they need to have access to it. They need to have physical access to the food, right? So it has to be on shelves that they can reach. They have to have tools that they can use to do it, and that sort of thing. So, functional independence, that's the goal of the first plane. Then we get into the second plane. So the second plane, there's not quite the same level of brain development. It's more of a refining of the skills that we gathered in the first plane. But there are a few key things that happen. And like I said, second plane is 6 to 12. All of the planes are roughly divided into 6-year chunks, but it's different for every individual. So you might have someone who doesn't finish up in the first plane until they're 8. You might have someone who starts puberty at the age of 8, right? And puberty is kind of like the transition to the third plane, and we'll get to that. So it's different for every individual, but in general, it's about 6 years per plane. So in the second plane is when your social instinct really starts to kick in. You might have friends or want to like do stuff together when you're in the first plane, especially when you're older, right? When you're like 5 or 6. But now kids really want to work together or just be around one another. They want to talk. And they want to understand social norms. So this is like the more complicated decorum of like your pleases and thank yous. I think like a lot of gender roles start to get to crop up here, and that sort of thing. Let's see here. This is also the time of we call it in Montessori, we call it cosmic education, which sounds a little woo-woo, but it's basically what it's looking at information in the universe and how it connects, and then learning how to move between those connections. So in Montessori, we don't have a curriculum in the same way that a lot of traditional schools do. There's not like a set of information that we're trying to give to the children. We talk about giving key lessons, right? So that children can open doors for themselves. And so the idea of this is it's like, well, let's present them with an ancient culture, right? Let's talk about the Greeks. So we say that the Greeks are someone that existed. They lived in the Mediterranean. Here are some like general things about them. And so now the child knows that the Greeks exist, right? And they will be curious about that. And then they'll want to learn more. But instead of like giving them a lecture on it, we say, go find some books about them. Go do some research on the internet. Go find someone else who is knowledgeable to ask questions about these sorts of things. And so in this way, we've presented a key, and then they're learning how a bunch of different information relates to that key. And once you do this a few times, you can start chaining these things together. So it's like we learned about the Greeks, and then that took us to discovering, the Romans are a thing that exists. And now we can draw a line in history between how we got from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, right? And a lot of this is done through storytelling. Stories are really engaging for children. So we have what we call the great stories in Montessori, and these are kind of the fundamental keys. And this is like, how did the universe start? How did the earth form? How did life start on Earth? And then how did humans come about and develop on Earth? And those are kind of like the 4 big things we want to get across, and then you can build on all the other information from there. And so in relation to this, this is the time where they're starting to develop an understanding of human cultures, right? So learning about ancient civilizations, learning about how people have done things differently throughout time. And this is often framed through how have humans met their needs depending on time and place, right? And this is also when you're starting to develop the understanding of morality. And in Montessori terms, morality isn't good or evil. It's the set of rules that we've agreed upon to like make our community function, right? So like, what is okay to do? What is not okay to do to keep the balance, to keep the harmony? So there's not necessarily a specification of what a good morality is. It's just kind of defining that like these are the rules we have agreed upon to make things work. And so you'll get a lot of kids at this age who it seems like they're reporting on their peers, being like, so-and-so did this, And it's not because they're trying to get the other person in trouble. It's because they are learning these rules of like, this person did this. I would like to know if I am also allowed to do that, right? So it has nothing to do with the original person, right? It is just them trying to develop their own understanding of what is okay and what is not. This is also why children of this age ask why all the time, is because they are trying to build all of these big connections. And so it's like, such and such happens. Okay, that makes sense. Why did that why did that happen? Well, it happened for this reason. Well, why that reason? And then, so they're going down this chain of questions to keep building these links in their understanding of the universe. So hence cosmic education. And this is all facilitated by the greater development of imagination and abstractive capabilities. So in Montessori, there's this understanding of like progression. As the child gets older, it is easier for them to abstract an idea. So in the first plane, if you're learning mathematics, right, if you're doing addition, you will have physical objects to represent the numbers. They're often color-coded to help isolate particular ideas. But you will physically manipulate them to do the math. But when you start getting into the second plane, you don't need to do that as much. So you'll get children who are now able to do the math in their heads or to do it on their fingers. And so you might teach them how to do math with an abacus. They might get through the lesson and do a few problems with it. And then you'll give them some more equations to figure out on the abacus. And then they'll just do them by hand, because they have understood the concept well enough and have developed the abstract capabilities that they no longer need the physical referral. And this is true too for for language, for grammar. So like in the first plane, you start learning your letters by tracing them out on it's like a piece of wood with like a sandpaper inlay, right, in the shape of the letter. We call it the movable alphabet, which is a box of letters made out of wood that you can place to build sentences and paragraphs. But then if you're ready, you just start writing it by hand. So I think that covers the second plane. Third plane, this is where I'm specializing in. In my training, we kind of get an overview of all of the planes, but this is where I'm planning on working. So this is where you are no longer a child, you are now an adolescent. The kind of the start of this plane is the beginning of puberty. And we discussed puberty as kind of a metamorphosis. You are going through a huge physical and psychological change when you're going through puberty. And because of that, you're pretty vulnerable to external stressors. So like, a lot of trauma can happen in puberty because everything is changing kind of at once, and you are going to lose a lot of like the skills you had when you were a younger child. So this is, a lot of middle school teachers, I think, have some frustration with like, wow, these adolescents seem like dumb, or they forgot things that they should have learned like a year or two ago. And that's kind of true, because your brain is rewiring in such a way that you lose cognitive ability, your memory gets worse, and this is because you are developing the next iteration of the systems you've built up, right? So your cognitive skills will return before your emotional regulation skills. And really, in the Montessorian understanding, while there is like this emphasis on, there is like what we would call academic work present in a middle school environment, the real focus is on social learning, because that's the systems that are coming online now. So it's like in the first two planes, you're developing all your individual skills. And now in the second plane, you're starting to step into society as a full member. So you're developing your social skills in that way. And you are reframing your individual skills to fit into community. So in that means like in the first half of the third plane, so like 12 to 16, 15, you want to try on as many hats as possible. Like that's one of your drives, is you want to see all the different things you can do in your society. And in doing so, you're kind of like learning the general structure of society. So, in traditional schooling, this is where like a lot of like job training can start, or you start taking college courses, like at your local community college, and there's a push to specialize at this age, but really you want, what the adolescent is looking for is exposure to as many different roles as possible. I went to a Montessori middle school. It was kind of an agrarian setting, so I learned how to preserve food, how to grow food, tend to animals, make maple syrup, how to work in a wood shop, how to like mill lumber, in addition to learning, reading, learning about the humanities, learning about the local history, reading all these fantastic books that kind of painted a picture of what society was like. Really, so there's at this age you want a lot of breadth of education, and some children or some adolescents will pick out things that they want to specialize in and are really drawn to, and that's okay. But broad exposure is really good. And a lot of this is done with exposure to adult work. So as an adolescent, I was doing work that was real, right? Like our school had a farm that paid for itself, right? And the money was raised through us adolescents working and then like running a farm stand, participating in like the local maple festival to sell our maple syrup, raising chickens to sell, that sort of thing. So like our work was real. It wasn't like a museum, right? Where like you get to interact with the thing, but there's no like real world impact. So like our decisions mattered, and we were in charge of them. So like usually when you were in ninth grade, you were managing a sector of the community, right? And we did it, and this was much to the consternation of some of my training peers. It was like basically a commune, right? Like the adolescents were running a commune, decisions were made collectively. There were specific managers for areas who were kind of like the experts, but things were brought to the community, discussed in the community. We sat in a big circle to talk about it, right? So kind of how the SRA itself is organized is kind of reminiscent of that. Also, to understand this age, adolescents, their primary drive is social needs. They want to do things with their friends. They want to do things that will impress their friends. They want to do things to impress people they have a crush on, right? And they're really exploring what it means to be in community with other people. And this also means that they don't want to be around their parents or their family. Not because they hate you or dislike you or anything like that. It is just a developmental need of like, okay, for our first 12 years, we have learned what it's like to be in our family and build those connections. Now we want to go build connections with the rest of society. So they need space and they need freedom from the family. Montessori recommends completely removing them from the family, like putting them off in their own space to do their own thing. So she like really recommends boarding schools. And I don't think that's right. I just think its parents should be way more lenient with their adolescents than we tend to be. And so if the first plane is the age of help me do it myself, then the third plane is the age of help us do it together. So that is the third plane in a nutshell. And then the fourth plane is, usually when you're out of high school, like I said, you're kind of considered an adult, but we know now that the brain doesn't stop developing between like 24 and 26 is when like all the major developments kind of really slow down. Your brain, all the neurons are fully coated in myelin sheaths, which is very interesting because one, it protects the neurons. Two, it makes them work a lot faster. It's like conductive, right? So it makes electrical impulses faster. So as you're growing out of your adolescence, your brain is literally faster, but it makes generating new connections harder. So that's why you kind of get better at the things you already know, and it's harder to learn new things, but not impossible. And so in my experience, the fourth plane is, if the third plane is we're learning what the structure of society is, the fourth plane is figuring out our place in it. Where can we contribute? How can we give back to our community? And then, I would argue that there's a fifth plane of development after this, right? Which is what we would consider adulthood, and that is doing that, right? So we've discovered where we can give back, and now we're going to settle down, and we're going to give back. But this is not really well studied, and like I said again, by this point, most of society considers you to be a fully fledged adult, and so they kind of just stop caring about your developmental well-being, which I think is a shame. I think everyone's developmental well-being should be considered until they die. So, now that we know a bit more about children and child development, how can we be in solidarity with children? How can we support them and make the world better for them, and in doing so make the world better for all of us? So in the Montessori world, we have a saying, which is to follow the child. It's like a nice way of saying stay out of their way. They know what they're doing. Like they are following that inner drive to self-perfect and self-construct. And how could we possibly know what another individual needs more than that individual? So this is, letting them follow their interests, pick their own tasks and work, because if they are working on something they're interested in, they will stick with it, and they will get it done. We have this idea of work cycles, which is like concentration cycles, and these get longer as you get older. In the first plane, for infants, it's like 30 seconds. They can focus on something for 30 seconds, and then it's on to a new thing, right? But by the time you're like 6, you can stay focused on something for like an hour, right? There'll be dips and peaks in this concentration level. Like during that hour, you might stop to talk to a friend, or just like stare at a wall, but you will come back and engage with the piece of work that's in front of you until it's done. I finished my observation hours for the first 2 planes, and I saw a kid who was working outside in the snow for like 3 hours straight. First he was practicing hammering nails into a log, and then he wanted to shovel the sidewalk outside. And he was out there for a while doing all of that, and was very focused on it. So children will even put themselves in like uncomfortable situations to do something they're interested in, like spending 3 hours out in the cold. It might be like 2 hours. 3 hours might be a bit of an exaggeration. So we talk about the adult's role, right? What is the adult's role in relation to children? But I think this is also just like, what's the adult's role in society in general? And I really like this idea of it is to prepare the environment, right? The job of the adult is to modify things that the child can't. And so when we talk about the environment in the context of a Montessori community, there are 3 components. There's the children themselves, who they're preparing themselves, so we don't got to worry about that. There is the physical environment, right? So what materials do we have that the children can access? Are we keeping it clean and organized and like in good repair? Are we making sure it's beautiful? Are we making sure it's safe? And then there's also the self, right? The adult. You are a material in the environment. Children will just absorb everything you do, even if you do not intend for them, or there's, that's just what they do. But, adults are also part of the environment. And in this way, kind of tying it back into politics, I think one of the great ills in our society is that we have discovered that through using supranature, we can modify each other, right? So the Montessori idea is very much like let people develop on their own, and like have them carry forth that idea of letting others develop on their own. But then you have like authoritarians, for example, who say, no, I know what's best for everyone else, and I'm going to make them do that thing. So in this way, they are modifying their environment, usually for personal gain. But that part of the environment they're modifying is other human beings. And I think that is not a good thing to do in a lot of regards. And then so on a broader scale, what is the environment? The environment is the community you're in and the society you're in. And I think a lot of our work in an organization like this is more geared towards these kind of higher level environments. Because like I don't expect everyone to be a caregiver for children. Like it's important to know these things, I think, in general, especially when we're like looking at like broader political action, like how do we want the broader society we live in to look and to feel, is understanding like, yes, that is the environment. Our children still inhabit that environment, but we have this kind of capability of putting them in little bubbles to shield them from the less savory parts. So other things we can do is, like I said, give them meaningful work, right? Like, take them to Food Not Bombs, right? Like, help, like, have them participate in mutual aid actions. If you know a protest is safe, kind of like a No King's Day one, like one of like the ones where, oh, those don't do anything kind of protest, but like you can expose children to radical action by taking them to these safer protests, right? I wouldn't have, maybe an older adolescent I'd bring to do like Ice Watch or something like that. And I mean, we've seen examples of adolescents doing that on their own with like no prompting from adults. It's just like, we're going to go participate in Ice Watch and fight fascism on our own, because they are capable and they have that understanding that that thing is wrong, and and they'll take matters into their own hands. And so when they do that, we got to back them. We got to support them. And so I have a little, my advisor in my training course has a granddaughter, a grandchild, I don't know their gender, a grandchild who is going to a public Montessori school here in Ohio. And that program is, I think, being shut down. I don't think it's under threat anymore. I think they're just shutting it down, which is really unfortunate. But, the children heard about this, and this is a child of like 6. Right? They were really distraught about this. So what did they do? They went to all their peers, all their classmates, and they gathered signatures for a petition saying, please don't take the Montessori away. And they got like 100 signatures from the other kids at the school. And they presented it to the superintendent of the school. And I'm like, that's fucking fantastic. And I told my advisor, if they still are going to shut down the program, those children should have like a walkout or a protest or something, right? And her response was like, no, her parents will take, or their parents will take care of them. It'll be okay. And like, it's just an unfortunate thing that this program's going away. And I was like so pissed off at that. I'm like, but you talk so much about like the party of the child, right? Like enabling. Like giving political power to children and having them, ending their oppression and having them participate in society. Like this is the exact time where, as an adult, you should be like, that's a great frickin' idea. I don't know if these children even know what protests are or what a strike is at this point, but I can give them that key. And if the child says, yeah, I think that'll help us keep the Montessori, then we should back that. Like, we should help them facilitate that. We should, if the school wants to punish the children for doing that, we should give a middle finger to the school, right? We should display solidarity. So that's kind of what I mean by backing their power with ours, is because children see what's wrong, but they haven't developed the sense of self, or like the ability to be like, to like say no to adults, right? At least like to hold their ground, because they don't have the power. So us adults with power, we need to back the children. We need to give them our power, and in that sense have solidarity. And the other thing, when I talk about meaningful work, we have this idea of the work of the mind and the hand, right? Right now, society is kind of atomized in a way that there's a lot of people who work with their hands. So you were thinking like blue collar jobs, working in the trades, you're building stuff, you're maintaining things, you're growing the food, right? And then you have the work of the mind, which is the managers, right? They're the ones doing the planning and the dreaming and the telling the other people what to do. But in Montessori, it's like, well, no. Every individual is capable of doing both of those things, and they need to be able to do both of those things at the same time. So meaningful work in this sense is it's like you have an idea, follow through on it. Build it yourself. You don't tell someone else to do it, right? You do it yourself. And I think a lot of why we see this division in our society is it's control, right? If you cut people off from the access of being able to dictate their own projects and their own ideas, and it's like you just have to follow instructions, that takes away power and autonomy, and is beneficial to existing hierarchies. So that's why I think we see that kind of division of labor in the way we do in our present societies, just because some people at the top want to control the people at the bottom. So one of the ways to take the control back is to say, no, I'm not just going to be your hands, I'm going to be my own mind in my own hands. And so supporting children and particularly adolescents in doing that, I think, is really important. So we've talked a bit about preparing the environment. I want to go into more detail about that because this is like, I think this is kind of the most important thing in this regard. So things to keep in mind when preparing an environment. We want things to be developmentally appropriate, right? So we've acknowledged that while everyone has the same tendencies, they come out differently depending on your age, and your age does present you with different capabilities. So you want things, you want tasks at hand, work at hand to fit the capabilities of the individuals you're working with, right? So if someone is struggling with abstraction, make sure they have physical references for whatever it is they're learning. If someone is really bored, give them something more challenging, right? If something feels like busy work, find them something that will have a direct impact on their community. And then also, like, the physical environment's really important. So I was talking earlier about, like, well, if you want your young children to be more independent, to have more functional independence, they need to have access to the things they need. So in Montessori classrooms, you will see tiny scale furniture that is fit for the size of like a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old, right? And then you'll have a little bigger chairs and tables for like the 8-year-olds, right? And stuff will get even bigger for like the 12-year-olds and whatnot. And then, you get to adult-sized furniture, right? But it's making sure that their environment is built for them. So, if you have books for your children, make sure they are on low shelves that the children can access. Make sure they, if you want them to feed themselves, well, then there should be a snack cabinet or a part of the fridge that is at the appropriate height. And again, when picking the materials, like there are some general materials that the Montessori says this should be everywhere, and children should have access to all this because this is what we think develops these tendencies the best. So there's like some stereotypical Montessori materials, in particular for language and math, that exist. And again, it would be kind of cool if all the children had access to that, but I don't think it's necessary per se. But what is really important is paying attention to what your children and adolescents are interested in, what's grabbing their attention, and finding more of that, and then not getting frustrated when that attention changes, right? Because again, they're doing a lot of exploring, right? So they're going to want to learn as much as they can about different things, which means you're going to end up with a lot of materials. And this is where like homeschooling co-ops or like community learning centers really can be really impactful, because like that can get expensive if your child is like bouncing between interests, especially when they're a bit older and getting into more sophisticated stuff. So having these mutual aid groups where you can share these materials between families and pass them around to like make sure, like, not everyone needs to go buy like a 3D printer if your adolescent is learning like 3D modeling, right? You can share one of those between a couple families. Like that is perfectly doable. You can have a community space with some 3D printers in it, and all of that. Yeah, and like I've said several times before, give adolescents meaningful work. They really want to be participating in society, and I think if you see a lot of disinterest in that, it's because they've been disempowered. They don't think that they can. They don't know that they can give back and participate in these ways because they especially through public schooling, you get cut off from your autonomy, right? Your schedule's laid out for you. The exact things you're supposed to learn are laid out for you. You were spending a huge chunk of the day not being able to follow your own body's needs, right? You have to ask permission for the bathroom. You have to sit at a desk and be still and be quiet when during this time of development, what you really want to do is going out, using your body and your mind to do work, talking with your friends, right? And we see these as like, oh, you're a bad adolescent if you do all this stuff. It's like, no, they're just following their natural development cycle, and they are trying to buck the mold you're shoving them into. Like I said, the adult is also part of the environment, so preparation of the adult is really important. So if you want to be in solidarity with the kids, part of that is fixing your own shit. And we kind of we're much more polite about this in the Montessori training, but to put it bluntly, it's fix your own shit so you don't pass it on. A couple key points to doing this is, one, be an observer, right? Montessori developed all of this theory based on scientific observation. She was trained as like a medical scientist, and so like she learned all this because she just sat and watched the kids. She didn't try and interfere. She didn't try and tell them to do things. She kept herself out of it, and just noticed when a child was really distraught over something and was like, okay, well, what do we change about the environment so that doesn't happen, right? So practice observing. Friendliness with error. This is another really important thing in Montessori, is we don't correct and we don't punish. Generally, there's a balance between like operating within contemporary society. Like, people will get kicked out of schools if they like cause really big problems, or there will sometimes be reprimands or punishments, but it's not the same as in public school, and it's never for something like doing a piece of work incorrectly, right? Everything is always seen as a learning opportunity. Really, the punishment only happens if you've like physically endangered someone else, right? Like, I heard a story of like some middle schoolers who snuck out and stole booze from a Walmart, right, and got drunk on campus, and they weren't even kicked out of the school. It was just like, you guys have to go finish the session from remote because we feel like we have to take some sort of action. Go back to your parents, think about this, and turn in your schoolwork digitally. And I haven't heard the follow-up story from that, but hopefully they learned their lesson and they're doing better, and they've gotten that particular tomfoolery out of their system. So, if someone's doing like a math problem and they screw it up, you don't correct them like, oh no, that's wrong, this is the answer. It's like, let's investigate that again. Let's take another crack at it. Let's walk through the steps you did. And like, being wrong is not a bad thing. It is just another opportunity to learn. And in this way, being wrong is quite beneficial. Sometimes you want to be wrong a lot, because that means you're going to learn a lot. And then, like I said before about fixing your own shit, understanding your own trauma, and like your spiritual needs in that sense, your emotional needs, is because I don't think there's anyone who's like gone through public school without being traumatized, right? Like, I have not met that person. I think there's a lot of people who are like, well, I turned out okay, and it wasn't so bad, and I had some good moments, and like, that's great, but I think that you're not immune to propaganda, right? right? Like the systemic effects of public education were imprinted on you, whether or not you acknowledge that or see that or feel that as like a painful thing. And then, but for like neurodivergent people especially, like, oh yeah, like there's, they can't do, they can't find control groups for neurodivergent people in like trauma studies, is because they can't find untraumatized neurodivergent people. Right. And then so like kind of understanding what you went through, what the problems with that were, and not perpetuating that on the next generation, but like understanding how that creates biases and like responses and triggers within yourself. Excuse me. So that you don't end up accidentally doing, passing it on. Yeah, so I'm a very advocate for like therapy for most people, or some form of reflection. Excuse me, I'm burping a lot. Some form of reflection and like personal emotional growth. A little more on how to prepare an environment, and this is more at like the systemic level, more at the societal level, is engage in local politics. Right, so if we're talking about preparing the environment, another way you could phrase this is as removing barriers, right? So we've talked about all these barriers that, like especially in public school, that inhibit children's development for the purpose of molding them. So to prepare an environment, if we take out the barriers, right? We want to remove the barriers to development. So, getting involved with school boards, parent-teacher associations, zoning boards. Zoning boards have a lot of power in this country, because like that is how you decide what our physical environment is going to look like. And there's issues of car dependency. Like the car dependency is another angle of like, wow, children really have no autonomy because they can't drive, right? And for good reason. I think a lot of the time driving is a very difficult and scary thing. Though I have seen the stories of like the child who wanted a candy bar, so they stole their mom's car and drove to the gas station and got it, and they were like 8 years old. But it's like, if we want to have a walkable community, we need to have either just do it and say screw you to the zoning board, or we need to have control of the zoning board to allow for that kind of construction to take place. And then agitate on the behalf of children, like that story I gave earlier about the child who was upset about losing their Montessori school. Be obnoxious to the school administration about it. Be obnoxious to the politicians, even though I don't think they'll listen. If that fails, you're like, well, that's not radical enough, then just create community. Create your homeschooling groups. Create your community center, whether it's in someone's backyard or you have like another building for it. And you want to gather children of various ages and bring them into this community, right? So like right now, like our organization is a community of adults, and like that's fine. Again, societal norms and kind of like the focus of the group tends to dictate that. But if we're talking about like the importance of mutual aid and community building, it needs to be like, you cannot have a community of just adults. I don't think like a full healthy community is of all age ranges. And I didn't talk about this before, but this is also something Dr. Montessori observed: is children will teach each other. So you're like, well, how can you give all of these if you have like one adult or two adults to 20 kids, right? How can you keep on top of everything and teach everything, right? Well, the truth of the matter is that children love helping one another and they love teaching one another. So if a child has had a lesson and they've practiced it a bit and they're proficient in it, they are fully capable of giving that lesson to another child. Or if a child is struggling with a piece of work, they don't need an adult to come help them. Another child can come help them. And oftentimes this occurs without any interference from the adult. Sometimes a child will come to the adult and the adult will say, can you ask so-and-so to help you with that, right? Because I'm busy giving a lesson to someone else. But a lot of the time they'll just ask each other for the help. Or someone will notice that another child is struggling and they will offer help themselves, right? Completely unprompted. And in this way, if you have a mix of age ranges, right, like this is part of why the planes are in 6-year chunks, is so classrooms, at least in the school I went to, it was 3-year chunks. So you had like a 3 to 4 year age spread within that classroom. So you had children who had already had practice with certain skills and they could pass them on to the younger kids. And there's also like schools without walls. Is another concept that's very similar to Montessori, and it's just you have the whole age range, where you have a micro school, right, where you have high schoolers and elementary students and kindergartners like together in the same space, right, and so they can still all interact and transfer knowledge and help one another. And you might say, well, isn't that getting in the way of each individual's development? Like, no. Teaching someone something else is like one of the best ways to like learn it yourself, right? Because not only do you have to understand the concept, you have to understand the concept well enough to express it to a different brain, right? And so going back to talking about the mathematical mind, like that is an excellent exercise for the mathematical mind. Yeah, and like I said, homeschooling, especially here in Ohio, is far less restrictive than like trying to start a private school or public standards. It's like you can get away with a lot, and a lot of this has come from kind of like the far right evangelical push for like we want to be Bible thumping with our kids. But you can take it in the other direction. It's like, well, we can do this radical unschooling, community schooling, that kind of like it is a space for us to reform society in this way, or to create a revolutionary society, however you want to talk about it. So if you have children or know people with children, that is definitely something worth looking into. When I finish my training course, that's probably where I want to end up. I'm not so sure I'm cut out for even a Montessori private school, being a guide there, but I think I would do excellent working in a homeschooling community. So this is this chart is just some examples of like how you might change your language, to display friendliness with error and kind of like stay out of the child's way for development. I won't go into too much detail. I have it linked in the next slide. And I will put a link to this. I'll put those links in the description of the YouTube video. But just to hit a couple of these things. So in order to see through the child's eyes, instead of denying something, so like they fall and hit themselves, right? Instead of denying, like, oh, don't worry about it, it's just a bump. You see it from their perspective, like, wow, was that a shock? That can hurt. Wow, like, yeah, that's a thing that happens, right? Instead of telling, like, oh, no, don't feel that, right? Helping children to be responsible, instead of threatening, punishing, bribing, or a timeout, instead of saying something like, if you do that again, I'll blank, you can say something like, oh, you look upset, do you want to cuddle? Calm them down, and then we can say, like, oh, I think you hurt our friend. How can we make it up to them, right? So building these kind of repair bonds. And this is a little touchy thing. I think that should be a separate presentation about like, the one thing I wish Montessori did better for me was like how to stand up for myself in the face of bullies. Because while this is great, and like the talking everything out is great, I think like there are real instances of like you need to be able to fight back. And I think like, the rise of fascism in our country is a great example of like, these are not people you can reason with. These are not people interested in having a conversation or hearing you out. What do you do in that scenario? And I think that's kind of a blind spot in Montessori. But, I think given the nature of this organization, I think people here can kind of figure out good ways to get around that. Then last slide is just some further reading and resources. If you're interested in looking at some Montessori materials or possibly getting some free ones for your children to work with, I included some links. I have the handout for the change in language, and then I also just listed all of the books that I have read They're collections of Montessori's. She only wrote like 2 books, but she gave hundreds and hundreds of lectures that people transcribed and translated. And so I've read a lot of her lectures, so I just listed those out, and then a few other notable texts in the realm of not specifically child development, but in like societal development, like how might we want to reshape society, and like how did we get here, and what elements of society are worth changing. And those are The Civilizing Process by Norbert Elias, Mutual Aid by Peter Kropotkin, which I'm sure many people here are familiar with, and The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber. And I think Graeber is another name that a lot of people here are familiar with. So, that was the presentation. I hope I was about an hour long, a little over, that's okay. And I hope that was interesting. And I am going to stop the recording now if there are any questions.